Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run. So what this film is essentially about is basically we focus on SpongeBob and, he's going about his day and everything like that, and one day he comes home and, oh my god, he realizes that Gary is missing. He doesn't realize, what's really happened to him, so he decides to team up with Patrick to figure out where Gary has gone. They eventually end up going to the lost city of Atlantis to try to track him down and figure out, what's really happened, while subsequently we also get a look into how SpongeBob met Gary, as well as numerous other flashbacks of how the gang met and all that stuff. So, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, I was very excited for this film. I mean, just the idea of a SpongeBob movie in general gets me very excited. I'm a big fan of both SpongeBob films. The first one, it's highly regarded for a reason. It truly is one of the best, I think, movie... It truly is one of the best movies based on a TV show that's ever been out there. It holds up extremely well. It's a really well done story, and just overall, I mean, it was the best possible way to, really tell this, to really do this show in a movie format. And I think they did a great job with that. But I've always thought that that probably should have been the end. A lot of people do believe that, and I do as well. It very much should have been the end, because it really is kind of where the show peaked. And as far as the second movie goes, I've always enjoyed it a lot. I think it's extremely creative, and it's weird, definitely, but it's very ambitious, and I've always really appreciated that ambition from it. And it also was a big return for Steven Hillenburg. He was finally starting to, get a little bit more involved with the show again. It seemed like the show was starting to go back to its roots. And then he died. Tragedy struck, which obviously was an that was obviously an unavoidable situation. There wasn't much they could have done. But after that had happened, a lot of people were wondering what was really going to happen with this movie, because Hillenburg was originally working on it, and I'm pretty sure he died before they finished making the movie. So a lot of people were unsure of what they were really going to do with this one. They changed titles and things like that. They changed animation styles, and so a lot of people were unsure, but I remained very hopeful for this movie, because again, I love SpongeBob. It was one of my favorite cartoons growing up. It's still a cartoon that I still very much do enjoy. I do believe it's gone on way too long at this point, but it's one of those things that normally when a SpongeBob movie comes out, it turns out nothing. It's been nothing but successful up to this point. I've had, some really great memories of watching both movies. So I was at least hoping with this one that I could have a really good time with it, that it could be a really fun movie, something that I really do end up enjoying, and it kind of sucks. I'm not gonna lie. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, it really makes me understand why people were not liking that second movie, because this feels like the most subpar possible SpongeBob movie that we really could have gotten. It's derivative, it's generic, it takes everything that you love in a SpongeBob movie and distills it to the most basic quality, and I mean that in the worst way possible. And what could have been, I think, just a really fun adventure is, again, a very simplified one that feels very derivative and almost like something we've seen done before, and just really did not work for me very much at all. But we are just getting to right now, starting off with the voice cast. And look, when it comes to the voice cast here, I don't really have to say too much at all. It's great to see all of the original voice actors back. They always do a good job in these roles. Even when it is the worst possible writing, they're all still really good. I think definitely that was one of the better things about this film. And even some of the newer characters. I really liked Awkwafina in this movie quite a bit. I think she definitely gives a really strong performance here. And so from a voice acting perspective, they definitely do a good job with that. But now I really want to talk about the things that do bring this movie down, and that's the directing and the writing, because this film is surprisingly directed by one of the people that have been involved with SpongeBob for years in Tim Hill. This is someone that has been an executive producer. I'm pretty sure he's directed episodes of this, he's written episodes of the show before and things like that. He's been with it since the beginning. And what's really weird about it is that though he does understand the essential spirit of SpongeBob, it's very wacky and out there, and he does do a good job with that, something about it just feels off. It feels rather uninspired, which is really weird. It feels like Hill, as a director, it did the bare minimum here. He directed it because of the fact that somebody had to direct the movie. And aside from that, it just doesn't really feel like he did a ton here to really make this film stand out. That's not to say there aren't fun moments, because there definitely are, but overall, his directing, it's easily the weakest in the entire trilogy. There really is nothing here that I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting approach. That's a really interesting idea. I just don't think his directing, really works here very much at all. But easily the biggest issue with this film has to be the screenplay, which I'm sorry to say, it's just kind of a mess here. And it doesn't start off that way. There are definitely moments that do work here. Just seeing these characters interact alone can be a lot of fun. The movie starts off and, it's SpongeBob and Patrick and them just kind of yelling at each other, and Squidward getting annoyed, and then SpongeBob going to the Krusty Krab and us having like a nice little moment there, and then Plankton trying to steal, the formula. These are things we become accustomed to within SpongeBob, and there's still a lot of fun here to watch, and I think there's definitely ways that the film does a good job. It does. And I think there are definitely moments that were a lot of fun. For the first 15 minutes of this movie, I was generally enjoying it. But then the actual plot starts, and once that happens, the film just kind of loses me from there. And it's mainly because the story to this movie just isn't very good. That's not to say that the entire story sucks, but the best way to put it is that half of this movie feels like a rehash of the first film, where SpongeBob and Patrick are going on this quest, and only they can go on this quest, but they're unsure if they can really do it, and SpongeBob isn't sure if he has courage and things like that, and, they're going to this one location to relocate something. And it's like, we've seen this done before. It's all been done in the first movie. Even the villain of this movie is King Poseidon, and you can kind of, and King Neptune wasn't the villain of the first SpongeBob movie, but he played a pretty big part in it, and here, Poseidon is very much the villain, and so half of the movie very much does feel like a rehash of the first film, and just like ideas that we've seen done before. There are multiple locations that they go to, in this film. SpongeBob and Patrick are going on this adventure together, and Plankton's also heavily involved with this, and this is all part of his plan to get the secret formula and things like that, and it's like, this all feels very familiar. We've seen all of this done in the first movie, but this film almost acts like none of that happened, because the message is the exact same thing, where SpongeBob doesn't feel he has any courage, and you're just wondering, like, why is he struggling with this? He overcame this in the first movie, so I don't really understand why this is an issue for him. But okay, so that's definitely a huge problem with this movie. That's something that definitely does bother me for sure. But then let's talk about the new ideas that they have, because the new stuff they do in this movie really doesn't work either. And here's the thing. There are a lot of weird moments in this film, but unlike something like, say, Sponge Out of Water, where they really go for it in terms of creativity, they really go for it in terms of just how absurd they can really get, here it feels lazy. It feels like they just don't really have a lot of new ideas here. They do this really weird thing where, in terms of the locations that they go on within this quest, which first of all, doesn't really feel like one. They only go go to 2 places in this entire movie, and really they only go to 1 place, because the other place they go to is this whole elongated sequence where they're in some, like, western area with all these, like, zombies or whatever, and Snoop Dogg is singing, and there's this whole, like, rap sequence that takes place, and this entire moment felt so superfluous to me. I have not been this baffled watching anything in SpongeBob in quite some time. I couldn't believe they actually kept this in the movie. It felt like an entire sequence that you could remove. They even say in the beginning of the sequence, like, this is a dream, and I'm like, okay, if this is a dream, why the fuck should I care? Like, why does this matter at all? They keep just harping on this one sequence, and it's just weird. It just really doesn't work. And then what they decide to do is, in this sequence, they met this sage played by Keanu Reeves, which you have seen in the trailer. And instead of him just being like a one and done, they overuse him a lot in this movie, but he doesn't really do particularly anything that interesting. It's just kind of like he's Keanu Reeves as a sage, and he's there to give SpongeBob and Patrick advice when he needs it. And again, it just feels so unnecessary. I don't understand why they did this. It feels like they just thought the idea of Keanu Reeves being in this movie was funny. They're trying to capitalize on Keanu Reeves' recent resurgence, and it feels like the most desperate attempt that I have seen. There is nothing that they really give to this character. There's nothing interesting that he really ends up doing. He's just kind of there, and I just didn't really understand the point of him at all. And even certain parts of this movie, it just feels slightly off. The dialogue in this film, there's just something really weird about it. It feels overly modern. There are things that Squidward will say, especially, where I'm like, he wouldn't say that. That doesn't really make any sense. You know, SpongeBob's always had like a timeless sort of feel to it, and when you have a scene in this movie where SpongeBob and Patrick are watching what's happened to Gary, like, through a projector, and Keanu Reeves goes, oh, it's not like Skype or FaceTime, it just leaves me scratching my head. Like, why would they know what that is? Like, they've never referenced this stuff before, so why are you referencing it now? It just felt really weird. Even the opening of this movie, there's this narration that Tim Hill does. It's not the classic, like, welcome to Bikini Bottom. Like, it's not that narration. It's what feels more like something in a David Attenborough documentary, and it just feels off, and that's the best way to describe it. Like, even the things that they're trying to do, it just doesn't feel right a lot of the time, and I think that's definitely one of the biggest issues with this movie for sure. The only good new idea that I generally liked that they had is this character Otto, played by Awkwafina. I actually like this character quite a bit. It's this robot of sorts that kind of just does their own thing, and it's kind of fun to watch, but even at that, they don't really do all that much with this character. It's kind of just like this robot that turns into a boat that, like, drives itself and, you know, does the opposite of what SpongeBob and Patrick are telling it to do. That's kind of it. There's not really much else to that character. So even the villain in this movie, now look, SpongeBob villains have never really been all that great. You know, Burger Beard in the second film, on a rewatch, he really isn't that great. You know, he's not a terrible villain or anything, but at least he had something to do. Here, King Poseidon is given absolutely jack shit in this film. He actually has a pretty decent setup where he is balding and he wants to find a way to retain a hair cream, so he ends up recruiting Gary as a way to do that, but they don't do anything interesting with him. It doesn't go beyond that at all. He doesn't have any other funny moments besides that, and Matt Berry and Reggie Watts were honestly kind of fun at first, but they do absolutely nothing with them after that introduction, and I just was kind of wondering, like, what was the point of this setup here? Why are you setting up this gag if you're not going to pay it off? And just, there's so many things that bother me in this movie. Even the plot itself, SpongeBob and Patrick trying to find Gary, there's already been an episode about this. So again, this isn't really anything that different. It's something that we've seen before in another movie, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, why are we doing this again? Like, it feels like a retread. It feels like we're kind of doing the same thing. And yes, obviously, the way that Gary, you know, the matter of how Gary was kidnapped, that's different, but why is this the plot line they wanted to go with? You know, it's clear that they changed the entire story. The original film was supposed to be like SpongeBob, It's a Wonderful Sponge, and I feel like that was going to be more of like a retrospective of SpongeBob and things like that, and probably would be far more respectful than what we really did get here, but this just feels so lazy. All of the writing here feels very lazy. Even the conflict with SpongeBob and Patrick here, you know, it just doesn't feel genuine. It feels like it feels very manufactured in that way. The way that Mr. Krabs, Squidward, and Sandy end up getting entangled in this mission feels forced and manufactured, and it just is not very well done in terms of writing, and I think that just really does hurt this film overall. So yeah, the screenplay here is just very subpar. So I already talked about how those new ideas aren't great, but then the other part that really pisses me off in this movie is the other half of it. The other half of this film, you know, while some is a rehash, the other half is one of the most disrespectful things that I've seen in quite a bit, because it's literally just a setup for that horrible Camp Coral series that's coming out. And look, you can feel however you want about it. That's fine. I haven't watched it. But to me, I think it's extremely disrespectful, because Steven Hillenburg literally said multiple times that he did not want to do a spin-off with these characters, and now you have a show that is coming out that is essentially a spin-off of these characters, and not only that, it's a complete retread of what we've seen, but it's a complete retcon of what we've seen before, and it just doesn't really make any sense. And the third act of this movie especially, what it eventually devolves into is an absolute fucking disaster. I mean, the rest of the movie isn't very good either, but the third act is a full-on disaster. It eventually turns into just this 30-minute sequence of all of these characters talking about how much they love SpongeBob and the impact he's made on them, and you realize every single thing these characters have done, all their motivations, is because of SpongeBob. And no, I don't like that at all. I don't like any of these ideas that they're doing. It's just really stupid, and I feel like you could cut this entire thing out of the movie, and it's very obvious that this was not originally supposed to be there, because the film screeches to a halt when we go to this Camp Coral stuff, and it goes on for like about 20 minutes or so, and it goes from like character to character. Like Squidward says something heartfelt, then Sandy does, then Mr. Krabs does, and at no point does it feel genuine. At no point does it feel like it actually serves a purpose in the movie, and it just ruins the entire thing. All of the good work that the film originally did, which again, it was fun at first, is very quickly erased when you realize they're just not gonna do much here. SpongeBob and Patrick, like I said, they only go to one actual location in the movie, which is the lost city of Atlantis, which we've already seen them go to in another SpongeBob episode, and they get there like 40 minutes into the movie. So again, this doesn't really feel like an adventure or a quest or anything like that. So again, the writing here just really isn't that great at all. It feels very off, and it just feels like they didn't have a lot to work with here, which is weird, because I feel like SpongeBob movies, they've always done a good job with having a very creative story and something to really latch onto, whereas here, there really isn't much at all. Any attempt for something generally original or generally compelling, they decide to not do. They basically sidestep any sort of interesting story, and I think that they really did sacrifice any good work that they could have done with this film. So I really don't think the writing here is very good at all. Let's talk about the animation, because yes, this film is in a different style than we're used to. I actually did like it, though. I feel like at first, yes, it looks a little bit off, but I very quickly did get used to it. It's definitely one of the least terrible things about this movie. I think the animation, it definitely has a very specific look to it, but it still does look like SpongeBob. These characters do still work in this, you know, CGI computer, you know, sometimes claymation type form. I think it does work for this film overall, and I didn't really have much of an issue with the animation. I think that mainly did work here. The score in this film as well, Hans Zimmer did the score, is really not that good. A lot of the time they're not playing the traditional SpongeBob music. They're trying to play this more generic movie score, and it's just not very good, and I don't think they did a very good job with that at all. And there's a musical number as well that happens in the third act, and it's really not very good at all. All of the music in this film, either it feels like it doesn't belong here because it's a lot of just pop current music that doesn't fit in a SpongeBob movie, or it's just very out of place. Like, it doesn't fit in that sequence, and it's just not really all that great. So there just aren't too many things that work here. In the editing, this film is definitely way too short. They really didn't do much of anything with it at all. In fact, at points, it feels more like a SpongeBob special than it really does a full-on movie. And I think that they definitely would have, it definitely could have been better if the film was a little bit longer, but I don't even know if that's a problem because the other films were shorter than this, and they were able to tell their story to their fullest extent. It really just felt like they didn't really care about this movie, and they just kind of left everything in, and as a result, we just have a giant mess of a film. And again, for the first 15 minutes, I was actually kind of liking it. I thought there were some moments that were generally fun and clever, and it's mainly because I like these characters. But even the characters just feel a little bit off. You know, maybe they're a little bit more mean-spirited than they normally are, or they're saying things that just wouldn't really make sense. So again, you're watching characters that you know you like, but it feels like something is off, and I feel like that's the best way to really describe this movie, is that it's SpongeBob, but it's not the SpongeBob that you've grown up with. It's not the SpongeBob that you end up remembering. It has really misplaced sequences, like whatever the fuck the El Diablo sequence is, that just really have no bearing on the film whatsoever, and you wonder why it's even here. That is going on throughout this entire movie, and it just ultimately ruins the film. Look, the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, it's not a terrible film. There are some moments that do generally work. The voice cast is always really good. There are some funny moments here and there, but as a film, it just feels like a mess. Half of it feels like a rehash of what we've seen in previous films, and the other half feels like it's very disrespectful to its original creator and is blatantly trying to retcon things that you really, at the end of the day, Steven Hillenburg has already established. And at the end of the day, you just kind of wonder what the point of this film really is. It has a quest that feels very one-note and just doesn't really feel like anything that special, and just overall takes what could have been a really fun story and instead feels very reductive. It feels like they just don't really give this the passion, the fun that we've seen in other SpongeBob movies. It's just kind of lost there, and it really makes me worried for what SpongeBob is going to turn into. You know, this is a show that I feel like was finally starting to get back on the right track, and now it just feels like the creators are just doing whatever the hell they want, and I really hope that this is not the direction that SpongeBob is going into, but I really do fear it is, and if that's the case, it's just going to be very saddening to see what really came of this show. SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run was very disappointing, and I am going to give it a C. Alright guys, in my review of the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run, let me know if you guys saw this movie, or left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.